Flora and Ulysses, chapters 31, 32, and 33. Chapter 31, wholly unanticipated occurrences. Flora watched Ulysses fly over her, his tail extended at full length, and his paws delicately pointed. It was like her dream. He looked incredibly, undeniably heroic. "Holy Bagumba," said Flora. She climbed on top of the booth so that she had a better view. When Incandesto flew, when he became a brilliant streak of light in the darkness of the world, he was usually headed somewhere to save someone, and Dolores was always flying at his side, offering advice, encouragement, and wisdom. Flora wasn't sure exactly what Ulysses was doing, and he didn't look like he really knew either, but he was flying. "George Buckman," whispered her father. "How do you do?" Flora had forgotten about her father. He was looking up at Ulysses, and he was smiling. It wasn't a sad smile, it was a happy smile. "Dad," said Flora. There was a long, loud scream from Rita. "It was in my hair," she shouted. Someone threw a donut at Ulysses. A baby started to cry. Flora climbed out of the booth so that she could stand next to her father. He slipped her hand into his. "Wholly unanticipated occurrences," said Flora's father in the voice of Dolores. It had been a long time since Flora had heard her father say those words. "His name is Ulysses," she told him. Her father looked at her. He raised his eyebrows. "Ulysses," he said. He shook his head, and then he laughed. It was a single syllable. "Ha!" And then he laughed longer. "Ha ha ha!" Flora's heart opened up inside of her. "Do not hope," she whispered to it. And then she noticed the cook was leaping and twirling, waving a knife, and trying to reach the flying squirrel. She looked up at her father. He said, "This malfeasance must be stopped, right?" "Right," said her father, and then her father agreed with her. Flora stuck out her foot and tripped up the man with the knife. Chapter 32, Sprinkles. "I love Flora. It was in my hair." "Sunny side up." Splat. "I flew." "Where's Flora?" "Is that a piece of donut?" Sprinkles. Chapter 33. Does rabies itch? His eyes were closed, his head was bleeding. Flora knew from Terrible Things Can Happen to You that head wounds bleed excessively, whether they were bad or not. All head wounds bleed excessively, she had said to her father. Don't panic. "Okay," said her father. "Use this." He handed her his tie. Flora knelt down. She had a very powerful sense of deja vu. Was it yesterday that she bent over the body of an unknown squirrel in Tootie's backyard? "Ulysses," she said. She dabbed at the blood with the tie. The squirrel didn't open his eyes. An eerie quiet descended. The whole of the giant do-nut became preternaturally calm. Everything, the donuts, the squirrel, her father, seemed to hold its breath. Flora knew what was happening. She had read about it in Terrible Things Can Happen to You. It was the calm before the storm. The air becomes still. The birds stop singing. The world waits. And then the storm comes. Inside the giant doona, there was a moment of deep quiet, a collective held breath. And then someone said, "I think it was a rat." "But it was flying," said another voice. "It was in my hair," said Rita. The cook shouted, "I'm going to call the police. That's what I'm going to do." Rita was right behind him. "Forget about the police, Ernie. Call the ambulance. I have rabies. It was in my hair." "You," said Ernie. He pointed at Flora with his knife. "You tripped me." "That's her," said Rita. "She's the one. Plus, she brought that thing in here in the first place. Dressed it up like a baby doll." "I did not," said Flora. "Dress him up like a baby doll." and this is all your fault. The criminal element said that sometimes it was wise to put criminals on the defensive by making slanderous or blatantly untrue comments. The surprising unfairness of this tactic will often stop criminals in their tracks. It seemed to work. Rita blinked. She opened her mouth and closed it again. My fault, she said. Flora bent over Ulysses and put a finger on his chest. She felt the heart beating a slow, thoughtful way. Gratitude and relief washed over her, and her own heart, which was beating much too quickly, slowed inside of her chest. It answered the squirrel's heart with its own measured thud, thud, thud. Ulysses, her heart seemed to say. Ulysses. I'm calling the police, said Ernie. George Buckman, how do you do? Shouted Flora's father. Is there any reason to call the police? Well, for one, said Rita, it was in my hair. Do you think that the police should be notified of a squirrel in your hair? Said Flora's father. The idiocy of the question, its unsettling logic, made Flora suddenly grateful for her father. She picked up Ulysses and cradled him in her arm. I think I can feel the rabies coming on, said Rita. My stomach itches. Does rabies itch, said Flora's father. I'm going to call somebody, said Ernie. He tripped me. Who do you think it would be wise to call in this matter of a tripping, said Flora's father. He opened the door. He gestured to Flora to walk through it. She did. The door swung shut behind them. Run, said her father, and they both began to run. At some point, Flora's father started to laugh again. It wasn't a ha-ha. It was kind of laugh. It was a woo-wee kind of laugh. Hysteria, thought Flora. She knew what to do for hysteria. Her father needed to be slapped. Unfortunately, there wasn't time right now. They had to make their getaway. Her father laughed all the way to the car. He laughed when they were in the car. He laughed when he placed his hands at 10 and 2 o'clock. He laughed as they backed out of the car park and drove away from the giant donut. He stopped laughing only once, long enough for him to shout, Holy Bagamba, in the voice of Dolores the parakeet. And then he went back to laughing.